Richard Miller, Anjali Sharma, Victor Hayes, Margaret Miller, and Detective Aaron Ross. 5 names bound together by a story of love, betrayal, obsession, and violence. Behind the glitter of a perfect wedding lay secrets too dark to stay hidden, and within weeks, a young bride's life was brutally cut short. This is not just the tale of a marriage gone wrong. It is a chilling unraveling of pride, honor, and a past that refused to stay buried. The day of Anjali Sharma's wedding was filled with celebration, music, and laughter. Guests arrived dressed in their finest clothes, bringing with them gifts, blessings, and excitement. The hall was decorated with flowers, lights, and colorful drapes, and everything seemed to shimmer with joy. Richard Miller, the groom, stood proud, his wealthy family by his side, projecting the image of power and stability. Cameras clicked, capturing every moment, and the smiles seemed endless. To those who watched, it was a perfect union, an educated, graceful bride and a successful husband from a respected family. Yet beneath Anjali's carefully painted smile lay a secret heavy enough to shatter the foundation of this new beginning. As she adjusted her veil, her heart raced with a fear no one else could see. She was already carrying life inside her, a truth she could not confess. The child belonged not to Richard, the man she was about to marry, but to Victor Hayes, the ex-boyfriend she had desperately tried to leave behind. No one knew of the pregnancy. No one knew of the shame and confusion twisting inside her. For Anjali, the wedding was not a celebration of love. It was a performance, a stage where she hid the most dangerous truth of her life. The rituals continued, each step tying her closer to Richard's family, each vow spoken under the watchful gaze of guests and elders. Margaret Miller, Richard's mother, looked on with satisfaction, believing she had secured the perfect daughter-in-law. To the world, the ceremony symbolized union and happiness. But for Anjali, each ritual felt like a chain tightening around her, binding her to a man who believed he was beginning a pure marriage. As the wedding concluded, no one suspected the storm already brewing beneath the glittering surface of their celebration. After the wedding celebrations ended, Anjali Sharma moved into the Miller household, a grand home that reflected Richard's wealth and status. At first glance, it was beautiful. High ceilings, polished floors, expensive furniture, and walls lined with family portraits. Yet within those walls, Anjali felt a constant pressure that weighed on her more heavily than the gold jewelry she had worn at her wedding. She was expected to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, obedient, graceful, and without fault. Every step she took was noticed, every action judged. Margaret Miller, Richard's mother, kept a sharp eye on her, silently evaluating the way she dressed, the meals she cooked, and even the tone of her voice. Anjali tried her best to fit into this demanding environment. She woke early, cooked elaborate meals, and carried herself with a calm smile. But deep inside, her fear grew stronger with each passing day. The child inside her was a ticking clock, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her body revealed the truth. She avoided questions about her health, excused her fatigue, and brushed off her sudden aversions to food, but she could see suspicion beginning to flicker in Margaret's eyes. At night, when the house was quiet, Anjali lay awake staring at the ceiling, trapped between 2 lives. One was the role she had been forced to play, the loyal wife building a new family. The other was the reality of her hidden past with Victor Hayes, a reality she could never reveal. Each morning, she dressed in her new identity, masking the growing anxiety inside her. To the world, she appeared as a bride adjusting to married life. But within her, the secret she carried grew heavier, threatening to unravel everything she had been forced to protect. Richard Miller began to notice small but unsettling changes in his new bride. At first, he brushed them aside, telling himself it was simply the stress of adjusting to married life. Anjali seemed more tired than usual, her face pale and drawn, her energy fading quickly during the day. She often excused herself from meals, claiming headaches or nausea, and she pushed food around her plate instead of eating. Richard, proud of appearances, grew irritated at her behavior during family dinners. Margaret Miller, ever observant, was quick to point out how ungrateful it seemed for a new bride to act this way in a home that provided her with everything. The whispers began soon after. A neighbor, curious and sharp-tongued, mentioned to Margaret that Anjali did not look like a glowing new bride, but more like a woman hiding something. Another relative hinted at her fragile state with a smirk, suggesting Richard had not married as wisely as he thought. Margaret repeated these words to her son, her sharp tone leaving little room for doubt. Slowly, Richard's pride began to erode. He watched Anjali more closely, noting how she avoided heavy work, how she covered herself with loose clothes, how her body seemed softer in ways he could not ignore. Doubt crept into Richard's mind like poison. Was this simply poor health, or something far worse? Margaret's remarks stoked his unease. She reminded him of the family's reputation, how quickly society could gossip and ruin their standing. Richard tried to push the thoughts away, but they lingered, growing louder with every glance at Anjali's quiet, distant face. What once seemed like a perfect marriage now felt like a fragile mask, and behind it, he sensed a truth waiting to break free. Victor Hayes returned to town without warning, his presence stirring old memories and new suspicions. Years earlier, he had been a man with little direction, reckless, ambitious, and constantly chasing quick money. When Anjali Sharma ended their relationship, she believed she had closed the door on a painful chapter of her life. Yet now he appeared transformed. Victor drove expensive cars, wore tailored suits, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had finally found success. His return did not go unnoticed. In small towns and tight communities, nothing stayed hidden for long. Gossip spread quickly. People whispered that Anjali and Victor had once been inseparable, that she had loved him more deeply than she ever could love Richard. The rumors grew bolder with each retelling, twisting fact into scandal. Some said Victor had never stopped pursuing her. Others claimed she had married Richard only to secure a stable future. Though Victor never approached Anjali after her marriage, his mere presence was enough to ignite suspicion. Richard heard these whispers, at first dismissing them as jealous chatter. But the words lodged in his mind, mixing with the doubts already planted by his mother. Each time he saw Victor around town, shaking hands with businessmen or chatting with acquaintances, Richard felt an unease he could not shake. The image of Anjali's pale face and evasive behavior began to take on a new meaning. For Anjali, Victor's return was like a shadow following her every step. She avoided looking at him in public, avoided streets where he might appear, but she knew people were talking. She knew her past was catching up to her. And with every rumor that reached Richard's ears, the fragile balance of her new life in the Miller household slipped further toward collapse. Richard Miller's growing doubts reached their peak one evening when he confronted Anjali Sharma about the changes he could no longer ignore. By then, the whispers from neighbors, his mother's constant remarks, and his own observations had hardened into suspicion he could not silence. Anjali's attempts to disguise her condition had grown weaker as her body betrayed her with small but undeniable signs. Her loose clothes no longer hid the gentle curve of her stomach, and her weariness could not be explained away by household chores. Richard demanded answers, and though Anjali tried to maintain her composure, her silence spoke louder than words. When pressed further, she could not deny the truth. The pregnancy was real, and the child did not belong to him. The revelation hit Richard like a blow. He felt as though the foundation of his marriage, his reputation, and his pride had all been destroyed in a single moment. Rage surged through him, twisting into humiliation as he imagined the ridicule from his peers if the truth ever surfaced. Margaret Miller's reaction was just as fierce. To her, this was not only a betrayal of her son, but a stain on the family name. She poured fuel on Richard's anger, her harsh words echoing through the home. For Richard, the situation became more than a private wound. It became a question of honor. The idea that his wife could carry another man's child gnawed at him until it eclipsed every rational thought. What had begun as suspicion now hardened into fury, and his temper grew darker with each passing day. The house once filled with tense silence now pulsed with unspoken hostility. The breaking point had been reached, and with it came the shadow of violence waiting to erupt. The night that sealed Anjali Sharma's fate began with shouting that echoed through the Miller household. Richard's anger, simmering for days, finally erupted into uncontrollable rage. Margaret's cutting words had sharpened his fury, and the thought of his wife carrying another man's child became unbearable. To him, it was not just betrayal. It was humiliation, a stain on his pride and the family's honor. The atmosphere inside the house grew thick with tension, and every servant and relative present knew something terrible was unfolding behind closed doors. Anjali tried to defend herself, but her trembling hands and tearful eyes only deepened Richard's anger. To him, her silence and fear seemed like confirmation of guilt. The accusations turned violent, his temper exploding in ways Anjali had never imagined. What began as shouting quickly escalated into physical blows, each one fueled by his desperation to erase the shame he believed she had brought upon him. Her cries for mercy were swallowed by the walls of the grand house, unheard or deliberately ignored by those too afraid to intervene. The violence stretched through the night, relentless and brutal. Anjali's fragile body could not withstand the rage that consumed Richard. By the time silence returned, she lay broken, her life slipping away. The home that had once witnessed her shy smiles as a new bride now bore the marks of tragedy. When morning light filtered through the curtains, it revealed the aftermath of a night that could never be undone. Anjali was gone, her secret silenced forever, her body carrying the evidence of both her unborn child and the cruelty that had ended her life. For Richard and Margaret, the night brought no relief, only the weight of a crime too heavy to bury. In the hours after Anjali Sharma's death, panic consumed the Miller household. Richard, his hands still trembling from the violence of the night, looked to his mother for guidance. Margaret Miller, cold and calculating, refused to allow fear to dictate their next move. To her, the greatest danger was not the crime itself, but the disgrace it could bring upon their family name. She insisted they act quickly, to erase any trace of what had truly happened. Together, they staged the scene to resemble a tragic accident. Margaret suggested that Anjali had fallen down the stairs, a plausible story for a fragile young bride adjusting to a new home. Richard, though shaken, followed her instructions, moving her body and arranging details to fit the false narrative. Jewelry was removed, personal belongings were locked away, and servants were sternly warned to remain silent. Their silence was not voluntary, it was demanded, enforced by the threat of losing their livelihoods or facing something far worse. When relatives began to arrive after hearing whispers of tragedy, the Millers presented their story with solemn expressions. Margaret played the role of the grieving mother-in-law, her voice heavy with false sorrow, while Richard stood silent, his face pale, masking the storm inside him. Neighbors who came to offer condolences found themselves ushered away quickly, discouraged from asking questions. The family's wealth and influence became their shield, creating a wall of power between them and suspicion. But beneath the surface, the cover-up was fragile. Tiny cracks appeared in their story, inconsistencies that might have gone unnoticed by casual observers but would not escape the eye of a determined investigator. The Millers believed they had hidden the truth, but in reality, they had only delayed its inevitable exposure. Detective Aaron Ross was assigned to the case, and from the moment he stepped into the Miller household, something about the story unsettled him. He had heard the explanation. Anjali Sharma had supposedly fallen down the stairs, but the details did not align. Her injuries were too severe, inconsistent with a simple fall, and the expressions on Richard and Margaret's faces betrayed more than grief. Aaron had worked enough cases to recognize the subtle signs of concealment, the rehearsed answers, the carefully chosen words, the avoidance of direct eye contact. He began his investigation quietly, speaking to neighbors and household staff. The servants, though terrified, revealed hints of what they had heard: raised voices, screams in the night, and the uneasy silence that followed. None dared accuse Richard openly, but their fear told Aaron more than their words. Neighbors whispered about Anjali's unhappiness, about arguments overheard, and about rumors connecting her to Victor Hayes. Each account added weight to Aaron's suspicion that the Millers were hiding something far darker than an accident. Aaron examined the staircase carefully, noting the absence of marks that would have been left if someone had tumbled down. The neatness of the scene felt staged, too orderly for a sudden tragedy. He also noticed how quickly the family had tried to push for a quiet funeral, as though they feared too much scrutiny. To him, it was clear, this was no accident, but the deliberate silencing of a young woman whose life had unraveled under unbearable pressure. While Richard avoided his gaze and Margaret maintained her stern composure, Aaron began piecing together the timeline. The inconsistencies grew larger with every detail uncovered. He knew the truth was close, hidden beneath the family's wealth and influence, and he was determined to drag it into the light. Just when Detective Aaron Ross believed he was close to uncovering the truth, a surprising development shifted the course of the investigation. Victor Hayes, the man whispered about in every corner of town, stepped forward. He carried with him a collection of letters, fragile pieces of paper written in Anjali Sharma's careful handwriting, each one dated before her marriage. These letters revealed a side of Anjali's story that no one had known. In them, she pleaded with Victor to let her go, to stop contacting her, to accept that their relationship was over. The tone was desperate, not loving. They spoke of fear, of a woman trying to sever ties with a man who refused to release his grip on her life. For Aaron, these letters changed everything. The narrative of betrayal that Richard and Margaret clung to began to crumble. Anjali had not been disloyal to her husband. She had been haunted by a past she could not control. Victor's return to town, his sudden display of wealth, and the rumors that surrounded him painted him in a darker light. He had become a shadow looming over Anjali's new life, not a partner she willingly sought out. The letters suggested that if Anjali was indeed pregnant with Victor's child, it was not a result of choice in her present life, but of a lingering tie she had tried desperately to sever before her marriage. It showed her as a victim caught between two men, one clinging to her past, and the other determined to punish her for it. What Richard perceived as betrayal was, in truth, evidence of Anjali's suffering. Aaron now had the final piece to push forward. The tragedy was not simply about infidelity. It was about control, obsession, and the silence forced upon a woman whose cries for freedom were ignored until it was too late. The trial that followed became the most talked-about case in the community, a story that exposed not only the violent end of Anjali Sharma's life, but also the darker forces that had shaped it. Richard Miller was arrested and charged with murder, his calm facade shattering under the weight of evidence gathered by Detective Aaron Ross. Margaret Miller, once so certain she could protect her family's honor, was charged with abetting the crime. Her attempts to manipulate the narrative and silence witnesses were laid bare in court, painting her as a woman more concerned with reputation than justice. Victor Hayes, though not charged with Anjali's death, faced public disgrace. The letters revealed his persistent hold on her life, a shadow that had followed her even after she tried to move on. His image as a successful man collapsed, leaving behind only the portrait of someone whose obsession contributed to Anjali's downfall. The whispers that once fueled suspicion against her now turned into condemnation of him. What had been painted as a scandal of betrayal became, in truth, a story of a woman trapped between control, obsession, and violence. As the verdict was announced, the court fell silent. Richard received a life sentence, his anger and pride having destroyed the very future he had sought to protect. Margaret was handed her punishment, her influence no longer able to shield her from justice. Victor walked free, but his reputation was destroyed beyond repair. In the end, there was no true victory. Anjali's voice, her story, had been silenced forever. Her life became a warning, a haunting reminder of the dangers of secrecy, control, and honor twisted into cruelty. What remained was grief and the memory of a bride whose truth was buried beneath the weight of others' choices.